My vision blurred as I lay sprawled on the polished hardwood floor of my parents' grand Charleston home, the chandelier above me trembling with each distant echo of my father's footsteps as he moved in a slow, frightening circle around my body. The metallic taste of blood coated my tongue, and every breath stabbed my ribs like a knife. Yet the pain inside my chest was not only from the blows he delivered, but from the realization that he truly believed I had earned them. My name is Lena Caldwell, and that night I learned exactly how far my father was willing to go to protect the glittering image of our family, even if it meant destroying one of his own children. His shadow loomed over me heavy and distorted by the warm golden lights, and when he knelt, the floorboards creaked under the weight of a man who had already decided I was the enemy. "You pushed this family too far," he hissed, grabbing a fistful of my hair and yanking my head up so I was forced to look into the blazing fury in his eyes. "If you had just supported your sister's wedding, none of this would have happened." My lungs fought for air as his words struck almost as hard as his fists. My sister Victoria stood behind him, her arms crossed her designer dress, hanging over a nearby chair waiting to be steamed for the rehearsal the next morning. Her cold stare locked on me like she was watching a scene she had ordered, not a violent attack unfolding in front of her. She lifted her chin and said, with a voice dripping in contempt, "You always ruin everything, Lena. Always." My father tightened his grip and slammed my head back against the floor, and stars exploded across my vision. A strangled cry escaped me, but he was already pulling me up again, shaking me as if he could rattle obedience into my bones. "You think you can humiliate this family by refusing to contribute?" he growled. "Your sister deserves a perfect day, and you will not be the one who destroys it." When he struck me again, my body twisted to the side and my ribs screamed in agony. I tried to crawl away, dragging myself toward the front door, but each movement set fire to every injured part of me. Behind me, his footsteps grew louder, faster, fueled by the blind fury of a man who believed violence was discipline and control was love. My fingers brushed the edge of the doorframe just as a brutal kick landed against my side, flipping me onto my back. The ceiling spun, and the chandelier blurred with streaks of gold and white, as though the world itself was slipping out of focus. "Please, stop!" I gasped, but my voice was barely a whisper drowned beneath the echo of his rage. From somewhere outside the house, a dog's bark broke through the night. Then another sound, a distant voice calling out, maybe a neighbor. Maybe someone who had heard the commotion, but my father only cursed under his breath and delivered one final blow that sent a sharp crack racing through my ribs. As darkness crept in from the edges of my vision, I realized with a hollow, painful clarity that he would not have stopped if someone had not heard. I remember thinking that if I survived this night, nothing in my life would ever be the same, because something inside me had finally woken and whispered that I did not have to belong to this family anymore. In that dim blur of fear and fading light, I felt a small, stubborn spark rising within me, refusing to die. The sirens from that night still echoed in the back of my mind as the story rewound itself to the years that led me to that floor battered and breathless beneath my father's rage. Because violence like that does not begin in a single moment. It grows slowly fed by years of silence, obedience, and the kind of loyalty that only exists in families where love is conditional. I was born the second daughter of William and Meredith Caldwell, pillars of Charleston society, owners of Caldwell Interiors, a luxury design firm with clients on every prestigious street from Broad to East Bay. From the moment I could walk, I learned that our family operated under one rule: appearances above all else. My parents carried themselves like royalty, but inside the walls of our home, the crown always sat on Victoria's head. My older sister was the masterpiece, the golden child, the one whose smile could soften any scolding, whose tears could summon my father's wrath like a storm. From childhood, it was made clear that Victoria would be cherished, adored, pampered, and paraded, while I would be shaped, molded, corrected, and controlled, until I fit the quiet, obedient shadow they expected me to be. When Victoria threw tantrums, my father called them expressions of passion, but when I cried, he called it weakness. When she broke things, my mother laughed and said she was spirited, but when I made mistakes, I was scolded. lectured, reminded that I was lucky to be part of a family like ours. Memories flickered in my mind like scenes from an old film the time Victoria pushed me down the stairs at age 12, and my parents said I should not have been in her way the time she stole money from my room, but my mother insisted I must have misplaced it the time I brought home a handmade birthday card, and my father tossed it aside because Victoria's gift, a designer scarf, was more appropriate. Every injustice was small enough to ignore, but sharp enough to wound, and over time those wounds settled deep inside the parts of me I had been conditioned to silence. By the time I turned 18, I understood my role perfectly. I was the scapegoat, the emotional buffer, the one who took the blame, absorbed the anger, apologized first, and bent the most. When Victoria had a breakup, I was told to comfort her when she failed a class. I was blamed for distracting her when she needed money. My parents opened their wallets, but when I needed help, they asked what I had done to cause the problem. Charleston society praised our family, calling us picture perfect. But they never saw the way my father's jaw tightened when I spoke too honestly, or the way my mother looked through me when she was upset with Victoria. They never saw the small cruelties disguised as jokes, or the backhanded compliments that chipped away at my confidence piece by piece. Even now, as I lay in that hospital bed weeks later, I realized the violence of the wedding night had been built on decades of smaller blows, the whispered criticisms, the cold dismissals, the rehearsed disappointments, and every unspoken rule that demanded I stay quiet while Victoria shone. And for most of my life, I did exactly that until the day I finally said no. Growing up beside Victoria was like living beside the sun, blinding, brilliant, and burning anyone who stood too close while I hovered in the shadow she cast, and our parents reinforced that imbalance at every turn. Victoria Caldwell was born with a silver spoon and a spotlight, while I, Lena Caldwell, existed mostly as set dressing for her brilliance, a contrast to emphasize her shine. The favoritism was not subtle, it was the foundation of our household. On Victoria's 15th birthday, she received a champagne-toned Audi with a bow on top and a driveway full of cheering relatives, while I, at 14, was handed a small store-bought cake with my name misspelled on it because, as my mother put it, we should not spoil you both. During holidays, Victoria was paraded before guests in new dresses, jewelry, and gifts while I wore hand-me-downs. My mother insisted still had plenty of life left in them. At school, teachers praised her confidence while quietly advising me to speak up more, and at home, every conversation revolved around Victoria's triumphs, her cheerleading competitions, her popularity, her looks, her future engagement prospects. I was invisible until I failed to meet an expectation, then suddenly, I was all they could see. There was a winter I will never forget, the year Victoria crashed her new car into a stone mailbox after a party. She had been drinking, everyone knew it, but my father repaired the damage overnight and paid off the neighbor for silence. The next morning at breakfast, he looked directly at me and said, "You need to start being a better influence for your sister." The absurdity of it stunned me, but in our household, truth bent easily to protect Victoria's image. Another memory flickered her crying over not getting the lead role in a school play, prompting my mother to tell me I should consider dropping out of the audition entirely to spare her feelings. I did. She still did not get the role, but somehow that too was my fault. These patterns wove themselves through our lives until favoritism became as natural as breathing. Victoria expected to be adored, and my parents expected me to accept it without question. Even when I earned a scholarship to study digital design, a feat that took sleepless nights and 2 part-time jobs, my father brushed it off, saying college was easier for people with fewer social obligations. Victoria received a standing ovation for hosting a charity brunch that same year. I received a polite nod for graduating with honors. The older we became, the more dangerous the dynamic grew. Victoria had learned that tears and theatrics granted her power, and she wielded that power with precision. If she wanted something, she cried. If she wanted attention, she stirred conflict. If she wanted someone punished, she merely hinted at being hurt. My father obeyed those hints like commands, and my mother followed his lead, supporting the golden child, even when she created chaos and cruelty. By the time Victoria got engaged to Darren Thompson, a wealthy real estate broker, she was accustomed to extravagant treatment and immediate gratification. The wedding was not just an event to her, it was a statement of status, grandeur, and entitlement. and everyone in the family was expected to contribute to its perfection. Everyone except Victoria, of course. For her, the world bent, and everyone else was meant to follow. And for most of my life, I did follow bending until something inside me finally reached its breaking point. The 2000 wedding would become the final push, the moment where decades of favoritism twisted into something far darker. And though I did not realize it then, saying no was the first step toward everything that followed: the violence, the betrayal, the truth, and the justice that none of them saw coming. Gaslighting in the Caldwell household was not an occasional cruelty. It was a lifestyle, a carefully crafted system of emotional manipulation that kept me quiet, obedient, and convinced that every wrong done to me was somehow my fault. My father, William, practiced it with the precision of a seasoned craftsman, and my mother, Meredith, refined it with the soft, gentle tone that made her lies feel like concern. Victoria weaponized it with ease, turning every moment into a performance where she was fragile and I was the problem. It began so subtly, I did not notice it until years later, when every memory came back twisted by their words. If I cried, my mother sighed and said, "You know, your father only gets upset because he cares." If I tried to stand up for myself, my father snapped, "Stop being dramatic." If I questioned Victoria's choices, she would clutch her chest and whisper, "Look what you did now, you're making Dad angry again." I learned early that my emotions were inconvenient, that my voice created conflict, and that silence was safer even when it suffocated me. I remember one night in high school when Victoria accused me of ruining her reputation because I refused to do her homework. She burst into tears in front of our parents, claiming I had always been jealous of her. My father dragged me into his office and forced me to sit for an hour-long lecture while Victoria peeked through the doorway, smirking behind crocodile tears. When I tried to defend myself, he shouted, "Don't argue with your sister. She never lies." That line echoed through my life like a curse. Whenever Victoria said something about me, it became truth, no matter how outrageous, cruel, or fabricated. Gaslighting became a ritual in our house. If I expressed hurt, they claimed I was sensitive. If I was quiet, they accused me of attitude. If I hesitated, they said I was ungrateful. My mother perfected a particular phrase that always followed the worst moments. If you were stronger, this would not happen. It was her way of blaming me for my father's temper and Victoria's entitlement, tying their cruelty to my supposed weakness. And for years, I believed it. Even as an adult, I carried that narrative like a weight around my neck. After graduating college, I found an apartment with 2 roommates and a full-time design job, but my father still insisted on approving my decisions. My mother still sent unsolicited advice wrapped in guilt. Victoria still treated me like the family servant. If I did not answer a phone call immediately, I was accused of disrespect. If I visited less often, I was called distant. If I set boundaries, I was told I was tearing the family apart. Gaslighting turned me into a version of myself that doubted every thought, every instinct, every truth. And that was their intention. Because a daughter who doubts herself is easy to control, easy to blame, easy to break. The most painful part was that outsiders never saw it. To the world, we were refined, charming, generous. My mother organized charity events. My father hosted fundraisers. Victoria posted glamorous photos online with captions about family being everything. No one saw the way my father lowered his voice when he was about to lash out. No one saw the way my mother disappeared emotionally whenever conflict arose. No one saw the way Victoria manipulated conversations to make herself the victim every time. I lived in a house where the truth was a shape-shifting thing, molded by whoever held the most power. And in our family, power belonged to everyone except me. But gaslighting has a weakness. It only works if its target remains silent and compliant. And the night my father demanded I pay for Victoria's extravagant wedding, the night he claimed I owed loyalty, that I had never truly been given, something inside me cracked. For the first time in my life, I said no. And that one word unraveled the illusion my family had built for decades. They could handle obedience. They could handle silence. They could handle my fear. But they could not handle defiance, and defiance was the first step toward everything that came next. The spark that lit the explosion in our family came wrapped in lace catalogs, floral arrangements, and a wedding budget so outrageous it felt like satire. Victoria Caldwell had always envisioned a grand wedding, but when she announced the final estimate, a staggering $200,000, even I was stunned into silence. My parents, however, reacted as if this were entirely reasonable, as if spending the cost of a small house on a single day was not indulgent but expected because their golden child deserved nothing less. They gathered us in the living room one evening, the air thick with manufactured excitement, and stacks of glossy magazines spread across the coffee table. Victoria was glowing her diamond ring, catching the warm lamplight as she waved her hand, theatrically reviewing vendor lists. Darren, her fiancé, sat beside her looking more like a business associate sealing a merger than a man preparing for marriage. My mother clapped her hands together in a delicate show of joy. "We want this to be the most beautiful day Charleston has ever seen. It should reflect Victoria's radiance." My father nodded his approval, adding, "It will be a reflection of our family, too." A statement. The word statement hung in the air like a warning. I watched quietly, slipping into the familiar role of observer, but something in my chest tightened. I knew that whenever my father spoke of family statements, it meant someone else, usually me, would be paying a price. The moment came swiftly. William leaned back in his leather chair, folded his hands, and looked at me with the kind of calculating expression he reserved for employees, not daughters. "Lena," he said evenly, "your sister needs your support. The venue alone is $100,000. We all need to contribute." I blinked, my heart slowly sinking. Contribute? How? He exchanged a look with my mother before delivering the blow. $30,000. You will cover $30,000. The room tilted. $30,000. It was more than my annual income. It was more than my entire savings. It was impossible. "Dad," I said carefully, "I don't have that kind of money. You know that." Victoria scoffed, rolling her eyes dramatically. "It's always excuses with you." Darren placed a hand on her arm, quietly observing, but I caught the flicker of irritation in his eyes, already aware that this was not a request. This was an order. My mother leaned forward, her voice soft but sharp. "Lena, your sister has worked so hard her entire life. She deserves a wedding that reflects her status. We are all making sacrifices." I bit the inside of my cheek because I knew that was a lie. No one else was sacrificing anything. My father could pay the entire amount without blinking. My mother could too. Victoria certainly wasn't contributing a dollar. Yet they looked at me with expectation, no with entitlement, as if they had already decided my answer should be yes. "Dad," I said again, forcing calm into my voice, "I can barely afford my rent. I have student loans. I can't give $30,000. My father stared at me with cold disappointment. "You can and you will. You are part of this family and families support each other." I swallowed the urge to laugh at the irony. Support in our home had always been a one-way street. Victoria slammed a binder shut, startling Darren. "I knew you'd ruin this. You ruin everything, Lena. Every single time." I exhaled slowly, fighting the old familiar urge to shrink, apologize, fold myself into whatever shape they demanded. But the words came before I could stop them. "I am not responsible for funding your wedding." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. My mother's face stiffened with insult. My father's jaw clenched dangerously. Victoria's mouth fell open in theatrical horror. "Excuse me," she snapped, standing. "You think you're too good to help your own family. You think you're better than me." "No," I said simply. "I just think my money is mine." My father stood suddenly, his voice a low growl. "You ungrateful girl. We have given you everything. Your sister has always supported you. Now it's your turn to support her." Supported me how I asked quietly. Everyone froze, because they all knew the answer was in the air between us. Victoria erupted first, her voice shrill. "Don't twist this into something about you. This is my wedding, my day, and you are not going to ruin it because you're selfish." My father jabbed a finger toward me. "You will pay Lena. You will contribute. It's decided." "No," I said again, this time louder, steadier, sharper. For the first time in years, the word felt like mine. and it was the last fragile thread holding their illusion together, a thread that would snap in the worst possible way. The dinner that followed was never meant to be a meal. It was an ambush dressed in linens and candlelight, a stage carefully arranged for my humiliation. My mother called it a family discussion, hoping I would come to my senses, but the moment I stepped into the dining room, I knew exactly what it was. The long mahogany table was set with my mother's finest china, the same set she only used for guests she wished to impress, and at the head of the table sat my father, his posture rigid, his expression carved from stone. Victoria was already there in a pale lavender dress that made her look angelic if you ignored the cold triumph in her eyes. Darren sat beside her, resting uneasily in his chair, clearly aware something was brewing but unwilling to intervene. My mother floated around filling glasses, acting as if this were a celebration instead of a tribunal. I sat at the far end, and every instinct inside me urged me to flee, but my feet stayed planted because part of me still hoped this family would choose reason over cruelty. My father cleared his throat. "Lena, we want to revisit the matter of your contribution." His tone was deceptively calm, but the underlying threat was unmistakable. Before I could respond, Victoria leaned forward, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. "I don't understand why my own sister can't be happy for me, why she won't give up just a little for my big day. A little." That was how she framed $30,000. My mother placed a sympathetic hand on Victoria's shoulder. "You have to understand, sweetheart, your sister has always struggled with generosity." I felt the sting of that lie but bit my tongue. My father took a slow, deep breath, then turned his gaze to me. "You will apologize to your sister for your disrespect. Then you will agree to contribute. A simple step to heal this family." Heal was such a twisted word coming from him. I kept my voice steady. "I am not contributing. I am not apologizing for saying no." Victoria gasped, leaning back as if I had struck her. "I cannot believe you just said that. You are unbelievable, Lena." Darren shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. My mother sighed heavily, looking at me like I was an inconvenience ruining the evening I had planned a beautiful menu tonight, Lena. Why must everything turn into drama when it comes to you? My father's fist hit the table so hard the silverware jumped. "Enough. You will do as you are told." His voice was low, but carried the unmistakable promise of consequences. I felt heat rise in my chest, a familiar instinct telling me to fold, comply, shrink, but something steadier anchored me. "No," I said again. "I will not." The room froze. Victoria's face twisted in anger. She stood abruptly, slamming her napkin onto the table. "You always make everything about you. You should be grateful anyone even wants you at the wedding. You will not embarrass me on the biggest day of my life." My father pointed at me, his jaw clenched. "You are being selfish. You are tearing this family apart. Look at what you are doing to your sister." My mother nodded solemnly as if I were committing some unforgivable betrayal. "Why can't you just do this one thing, Lena? One thing. For family." The word family felt hollow coming from people who had never once acted like they valued me. I felt my heartbeat steady, slow, determined. I looked directly at my father and said the sentence that would ignite everything. "I am not responsible for your expectations, your image, or her vanity. I expected yelling, I expected insults, I expected guilt. What I did not expect was what came next." Victoria lunged forward, snatching her phone from the table and pointed it at me, recording as she screamed, "Look at her! Look at how she talks to us! This is who she really is." She shoved the camera closer, and my father rose from his chair, rounding the table with slow, deliberate steps. Darren muttered, "Victoria." "Stop, this is getting out of hand," but she ignored him. My mother whispered, "Please, Lena, just apologize." I stood. It was instinct, not defiance. I stood because my body knew something my mind had not fully accepted, yet danger was coming. My father reached me first, his breath hot with fury. "You will not disgrace this family. Not again." His voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "Apologize. Now." I swallowed hard, my pulse roaring in my ears. "No!" Victoria's scream cut through the room. Loud, shrill, furious. Dad, she is ruining everything. Do something. That was the moment the thin veneer of civility shattered, the moment the dinner became the final fuse that would lead to the explosion waiting just a few hours ahead. The night was far from over, and none of them had any idea how far this would go or how much it would cost them. The assault did not begin with a scream or a warning. It began with the quiet, controlled inhale my father always took before he unleashed his anger. The inhale that had haunted my childhood more than any shouted threat ever could. As that familiar breath filled the air, I felt every muscle in my body tighten, bracing for impact even before his hand closed around my arm. His fingers dug into my skin with bruising force, and he yanked me toward him so abruptly, my chair toppled to the floor behind me. Victoria kept recording her phone held high, excitement flickering in her eyes, like she was witnessing entertainment, not violence. My mother stood frozen, torn between fear of my father and disappointment in me, her expression a painful mixture of both. "Say you are sorry," my father growled, his voice a razor dragged across the quiet room. "Say it." I tried to pull away, but his grip only tightened, sending a sharp jolt of pain through my shoulder. "Let go," I said, breathless but firm. He did not. Instead, he shoved me back against the wall, the impact knocking the air from my lungs. "This is what you push me to," he shouted. "This is what happens when you disrespect your family." He raised his hand, and the first strike landed across my cheek so hard my head snapped to the side. A dull ringing filled my ears. The taste of copper pooled on my tongue. For a moment, everything blurred, then sharpened again into the horrifying realization that he was not stopping, that he did not intend to stop. My mother whispered, "Please, William," but made no move to intervene. Victoria lifted her chin and recorded from a different angle, making sure she captured every humiliating moment. "You deserve this," she muttered. "You always deserve it." I pushed myself up from the wall, breathing in short, jagged gasps, my ribs aching, my vision flickering. "Dad, stop, please." But my plea only fed his fury. He grabbed the front of my shirt and slammed me onto the hardwood floor with a force that sent a lightning bolt of agony through my side. I felt something shift a crack deep inside my rib cage, followed by a wave of pain so intense I could barely breathe. I curled onto my side, instinctively protecting myself, but he kicked me before I could shield my body fully, his shoe driving into my ribs again and again, until I felt something give another crack. Another scream trapped in my throat. "Stop it!" Darren suddenly yelled, leaping from his chair, but Victoria grabbed his arm, pulling him back with surprising strength. "No," she snapped. "This is family business. Stay out of it. Family business." As if violence was a tradition to be respected. My father leaned down, his hands shaking with fury, and grabbed a fistful of my hair, yanking my head back until tears streamed down my cheeks from the strain. His face hovered inches from mine, his breath hot, his eyes wild. "You will not embarrass this family," he snarled. "Not you. Not ever." I felt my heartbeat pounding against my cracked ribs, a frantic, desperate rhythm. I willed myself to speak despite the pain. "You are hurting me." His voice dropped to a chilling whisper. "Good. Maybe you will finally learn." Then he struck me again, this time with the back of his hand, the blow rattling my teeth. I collapsed against the floor vision, swimming nausea rising in my throat. The room spun the chandelier above, melting into streaks of light. I could hear Victoria breathing hard from excitement as she muttered things under her breath. Words I could only catch fragments of: stupid, selfish, always ruining everything. My mother stood near the table, her hands trembling but her feet rooted to the ground. She whispered, "William, please, enough, enough, enough," like a mantra, but she did not reach for him. She did not reach for me. She only stood there wishing someone else would stop him while doing nothing herself. My father hauled me upward again, and my body screamed in protest. I tried to steady myself using the wall, but my legs buckled. He grabbed my arm and shook me violently. "You will apologize," he roared. "Apologize!" Victoria stepped closer, shoving her phone inches from my face, capturing the tears, the blood, the trembling. "Go on," she taunted. "Say it. Beg." Something inside me flickered, then fought, then refused. No. The word was barely audible, but it snapped through the room like a spark, hitting dry tinder. My father's fury ignited. His fist collided with my ribs one final time, a blow so sharp and deep that the crack echoed in my ears, louder than his shouting, louder than Victoria's gasps, louder than my mother's quiet sob. Breath fled my lungs. Pain tore through my torso like fire. I collapsed fully, this time my body no longer responding, the floor hard and cold beneath my cheek. Victoria lowered her phone with a startled expression, realizing perhaps for the first time that this had gone beyond theatrics. "Dad," she whispered, unsure. My father stood frozen, chest-heaving eyes still burning, but something in his posture shifted as he looked down at me motionless, pale, struggling to draw even the smallest breath. My mother finally rushed forward, kneeling beside me, her hands shaking as she hovered inches from touching me, but never quite making contact. Someone outside yelled something. A dog's bark echoed, then sirens in the distance, faint but approaching. Victoria tensed, looking toward the window. "Dad." Someone heard. My father cursed under his breath, backing away from me, running a hand through his hair as panic replaced rage. The sirens grew louder. The world dimmed around the edges. Breath became a distant memory. And as darkness pulled me under, only one thought remained clear in my mind. If I lived through this, I would never be theirs again. The first thing I became aware of was the cold, not the kind that chills the skin, but the deeper, colder sensation of a room kept sterile and bright, where machines hummed in steady rhythms. When my eyes opened, the ceiling above me was unfamiliar white tiles lined with fluorescent lighting, and for a moment, I did not remember how I had gotten there. Then I tried to breathe. The stabbing pain in my ribs returned instantly, sharp enough to force a gasp from my throat. A monitor beside me beeped faster, and a nurse appeared at my side, gently guiding me back down. "Easy, honey," she murmured. "You are safe. You are in the hospital. Safe." The word felt strange, almost unbelievable after what had happened. My voice came out hoarse and broken. "What happened?" The nurse adjusted my oxygen tubes and looked at me with careful eyes. "You were brought in by ambulance. Your ribs are fractured. You have a mild concussion. You lost consciousness." She paused, as if measuring her next words. Someone called 911. Said they heard screaming. They saw a man leave the window. My head throbbed and scattered images returned. My father's face twisted with rage. The sound of cracking bone. Victoria holding her phone inches from my face. My mother frozen in place, the flash of lights outside. The nurse touched my shoulder gently. "Try not to talk too much. A detective will want to speak with you once you are awake." A detective. Panic fluttered under my skin. If the police had been involved, my family would already be crafting a story twisting the truth into something that made them the victims and me the villain. I tried to sit up, but pain shot through my side and the nurse eased me back. "Do you need anything?" she asked. I whispered, "Water." She helped me drink slowly, then left the room, and only moments later the air shifted as someone else entered. My mother. Meredith Caldwell stepped in wearing one of her tailored pastel suits, her makeup perfect, her hair smooth as if she had prepared for a charity brunch instead of visiting her hospitalized daughter. Her eyes traveled over me, taking in the bruises, the bandages, but her expression was not horror or grief or guilt. It was calculation. "Oh, Lena," she said softly, walking toward the bed. "What have you done to yourself this time?" The words hit harder than any blow my father had delivered. I swallowed the rising ache in my chest. I did not do this to myself. Her lips tightened just slightly and she gave a small dismissive wave. "You know how dramatic things get when you are emotional. The doctor said you fell." Fell. The lie landed with cold precision. My voice cracked. "Mom, he hit me. He hurt me." Her eyes flicked toward the open door, then back to me. Her tone dropped to a sharp whisper. "Lena, enough. Do you want to destroy this family? Your father is beside himself with worry. You know how he gets when he is stressed." It was shocking how effortlessly she twisted the narrative, making his violence my fault. My mother leaned closer, brushing a loose strand of hair behind my ear as if comforting me, but her voice stayed icy. "When the detective comes, you will tell him it was an accident. You tripped. You fell. You scared all of us." For a moment, I could not speak, could barely breathe even with the oxygen steady beside me. "Mom, he could have killed me." She straightened, smoothing the front of her suit. "Well, let's not exaggerate." The door opened again and Victoria stepped inside. She wore sunglasses, though it was nearly midnight outside, and her posture was stiff and patient, like the hospital visit was an afterthought squeezed between wedding errands. Her gaze swept over me, and for a flicker of a second, something like discomfort crossed her features, but it vanished quickly. "Seriously, Lena," she said, arms crossed. "Why did you have to make everything so dramatic? Darren is furious. We had to cancel our tasting appointment. Cancel their tasting appointment. That was her concern." I stared at her, disbelief and pain colliding in my chest. "You recorded it. You know what he did." Her jaw tightened. "Delete the recording I added." She stiffened. "What recording?" My mother shot her a sharp warning glance. "Drop it, Victoria." A shadow appeared in the doorway. A man in a gray suit holding a notepad. "Detective Harris, Charleston PD." He nodded politely, then stepped inside. "Miss Caldwell, I need to ask you a few questions about what happened tonight." My mother immediately placed a hand on his arm. "Detective, my daughter is exhausted. This really is unnecessary." She fell. "She always has trouble with her balance. We do not want to make this a bigger ordeal than it is." He gently removed her hand. "Ma'am, I still need to ask your daughter directly." My mother's smile tightened, but she stepped back. The detective turned to me, his voice steady calm. "Miss Caldwell, can you tell me what caused your injuries?" I opened my mouth, and in that fragile moment between silence and truth, the door behind him clicked again, and my father walked in. William Caldwell adjusted his cufflinks, composed, controlled his voice thick with rehearsed concern. "Lena, sweetheart, how are you feeling?" He looked at me with feigned softness, but his eyes flashed a silent message. "Remember who you belong to." And in that moment, I realized exactly what I had to do next. The moment my father stepped into the room, the air tightened, as if the walls themselves recognized the danger even beneath his polished exterior and calm, rehearsed tone. He moved with the authority of a man used to being obeyed, his shoes clicking softly against the tile floor, his expression carefully shaped into paternal concern. But his eyes, those cold, calculating eyes, told a different story entirely. They warned. They threatened. They reminded me of every moment he had forced me into silence. Detective Harris stepped toward him, extending a hand. "Mr. Caldwell, I have a few questions for your daughter, if you don't mind." My father shook his hand firmly, the picture of a respectable Charleston businessman, of course, detective. "Anything you need." He positioned himself near the foot of my bed, close enough to watch me, but far enough to appear uninvolved. My mother stood rigid near the wall, and Victoria moved beside her arms, crossed her jaw tight, her sunglasses now pushed to the top of her head, revealing eyes swollen from tears, though I suspected they were not for me. The detective turned back to me, his voice steady. "Miss Caldwell, can you tell me what caused your injuries?" This was the moment that had the potential to define everything that followed. I felt my father's gaze drilling into my skin, pressing down on my ribs harder than any physical blow. The old Lena, the conditioned, obedient, fearful Lena, would have apologized, swallowed the truth, and repeated the lie fed to her. But something inside me had shifted that night, something profound, something irreversible. I took a slow breath, pain shooting through my side, but I held the detective's eyes. I didn't fall. My mother stiffened. Victoria inhaled sharply. My father's jaw tensed, though only slightly, just enough for me to see it. Detective Harris waited patiently. I continued careful and deliberate. My father hit me. Victoria's mouth dropped open in outrage, whether real or performed, I could not tell. My mother reached forward. "Lena, stop this right now." But the detective raised a hand, silencing her. "You will let her speak, ma'am." My father stepped forward, his voice smooth, controlled, detective. "I think there's been a misunderstanding. My daughter has always been emotional. She fainted during a discussion. She fell. That is all." His words were laced with the confidence of a man who had convinced hundreds of people throughout his life that his truth was the truth. But the detective was not persuaded. He turned back to me and asked calmly, "Is there any evidence to support what you are saying?" Evidence. For a moment, panic gripped me because up until now, truth had always been my only weapon and truth had never been enough against my family. But then something unexpected flickered through my memory. Victoria. Her phone. She had recorded everything. I watched her now as she shifted uncomfortably, her hand instinctively moving toward her purse where she had stuffed her phone earlier. "Yes," I said slowly. "There is evidence." Victoria's face paled. My father finally looked shaken, though he tried to hide it. "What exactly do you mean by evidence?" the detective asked. Before I could answer, Victoria snapped. "There is no evidence. She doesn't know what she's talking about. Delete it!" My mother hissed under her breath, barely audible. My chest tightened as I realized how close they were to erasing the only proof of what had been done to me. I forced myself to look at the detective again. "There is a video. My sister recorded all of it." The room froze. Detective Harris turned to Victoria. "Ma'am, is that true?" She stammered. It's not, I was just," my father barked. "Victoria." And in that sharp command, I saw the crack in their control widening. The detective extended his hand. "Phone, please." Victoria hesitated, but under his unblinking stare, she reached into her purse, hands trembling. She unlocked the phone and handed it to him. He stepped aside to watch the footage, and for several minutes the room filled only with the faint sound of the monitor beeping and the distant bustle of hospital staff. When the detective returned, his expression had changed, hardened, focused. "Miss Caldwell, thank you for your honesty. Mr. Caldwell, I am going to need you to come with me." My father's eyes burned into mine, and for the first time in my life I saw fear behind them. Not anger, fear. The detective read him his rights, and as the handcuffs clicked softly around his wrists, my mother gasped in horror. Victoria sank into a chair, whispering, "Oh my God," repeatedly. My father glared at me with a promise of revenge, but I did not look away. For the first time in 24 years, I held his gaze without shrinking. After they escorted him out, Detective Harris returned and lowered his voice. "You'll need legal representation. You will need protection. Do you have someone you can trust? Someone who will fight for you?" And for the first time, I realized I did. Ava Morgan, my coworker's sister, a rising attorney who had once told me, "If you ever need help getting out of something toxic, call me." Without hesitation, I whispered her name, and in that moment, a new chapter began. Not of fear, not of silence, but of strategy, of justice, of reclaiming everything they tried to break. Charleston had never seen a wedding as extravagant as the one Victoria Caldwell planned, and that was exactly the point. The Caldwells had spent years curating an image of wealth refinement and familial perfection, and despite the scandal of my father's arrest, my mother and sister were determined to keep the illusion alive. They postponed the wedding only 3 weeks, just long enough for my mother to assure society friends that everything was a misunderstanding, and for Victoria to pretend her life hadn't been shaken. What they didn't know was that during those 3 weeks, I was preparing. Not with bitterness, but with precision. With the help of Ava Morgan, my new attorney, my protector, and the first person besides myself who believed me, I began gathering everything we needed. Hospital reports, photos of my injuries, text messages, statements from neighbors, and most importantly, the video recording Victoria had made, which the police had copied before handing her phone back. Ava told me something that stayed with me every day leading up to the wedding. Justice isn't only about punishment, it's about exposure. It's about revealing the truth they've buried for years. And the wedding was the perfect stage. The more Victoria posted about her upcoming biggest day of her life, the more certain I became of what needed to be done. Not out of revenge, though the temptation was there, but out of necessity. For me, for the truth. For the small, terrified version of myself who had believed silence was survival. On the morning of the wedding, I arrived early with Ava and 2 police officers waiting discreetly in the lot. The venue was a waterfront event hall adorned with towering white florals chandeliers and endless rows of champagne flutes. Inside, guests shimmered in designer clothes, unaware of the storm brewing behind the soft classical music floating through the air. I wasn't supposed to be invited, but Victoria, ever obsessed with appearances, had sent a formal invitation anyway, hoping to prove to the town that the Caldwell family was still united. She had no idea that by inviting me she had handed me the stage. When I entered the hall, whispers immediately rippled. Some looked shocked I had the courage to show up. Others leaned closer, curious. And a few watched with thinly veiled judgment, their gossip-ready smiles sharpened. I walked past them all with slow, steady steps, every piece of my body aching, but my spirit held upright by something stronger than pain truth. Up front, Victoria stood posing for photos in her lavish beaded gown, glowing under the lights. She looked every bit the spoiled princess she'd always been, though stress lines tugged at the corners of her smile. Darren stood beside her, stiff and tense sweat gathering at his temple. He hadn't been the same since watching the recording the night of the incident. As I approached, Victoria's face immediately twisted. "What are you doing here?" she hissed. "You're going to ruin my day again, aren't you?" I opened my mouth, but Ava stepped forward first, holding a slim black case. "Actually, Victoria, you're the one who invited her, and that's fortunate, because she has something to share with everyone." The room stilled. Guests turned, cameras shifted. A hush fell so complete it felt like the air itself had paused. The event coordinator stood frozen in confusion as Ava handed me a remote. At the far end of the hall stood a massive projection screen intended for a slideshow of childhood photos. Instead, it became a courtroom. I clicked the remote. The screen flickered. Then the recording began. At first, the guests looked puzzled. The sound of clinking silverware, a tense dinner table. Then my father's voice thundered across the room. "Apologize!" Now gasps erupted. People leaned forward. The video continued, my father grabbing me, slamming me, striking me, each moment captured from Victoria's gleefully cruel angle. My body hitting the floor. My ribs cracking. My sister recording. My mother watching. The hall dissolved into chaos. Some guests shouted, some covered their mouths. A few looked away in horror, and others stared at Victoria with open disgust. Victoria's face drained of color. Darren stepped back from her as if she had turned to ash in front of him. My mother stood frozen, her mouth trembling, her mask of composure collapsing for the first time in years. "This is manipulated," Victoria screamed. "This is fake." Ava raised her voice. The Charleston Police Department authenticated the footage. Silence slammed through the room. Then someone whispered, "Oh my God!" Another shouted, "Call off this wedding!" Someone else muttered, "Monsters!" Darren finally spoke, his voice trembling. "Victoria, you recorded this." She reached for him desperately. "Darren, please, she's twisting everything." But he stepped away, shaking his head. "I can't marry someone capable of this." Before Victoria could protest further, 2 police officers entered from the back. One approached them with calm authority. "We are here for William Caldwell and Meredith Caldwell." My mother gasped. "What? No, I didn't do anything." But the officer responded, "Your participation in covering up a felony assault and attempting to obstruct justice is a crime. Meredith Caldwell, you are under arrest." Victoria screamed as officers approached her mother. But it wasn't over, because Ava stepped closer holding a document. "Lena has filed a restraining order and a civil suit for damages, and she is pressing full charges. Every lie, every bruise, every manipulation, every threat exposed." Victoria stumbled backward, sobbing now not from grief but from the realization that her entire kingdom was collapsing, and she had built the foundation with cruelty. The wedding guests slowly dispersed, leaving a trail of shocked murmurs and ruined floral arrangements. And as police escorted my mother away and the hall descended into chaos, I walked outside into the warm Charleston air, lungs aching but free. For the first time in my life, nothing and no one owned me. In the days that followed, the ruined wedding consequences began to fall with a precision almost poetic, as if the universe had been waiting years for a chance to balance the scales. I had imagined chaos, outrage, maybe even retaliation. But what came instead was a slow, relentless unraveling of everything my family had built on lies. My father was the first. The morning after the wedding, he was formally charged with felony assault, domestic violence, and endangerment. The judge denied him bail after reviewing the video, his violence too clear, too vicious, too deliberate. News outlets picked up the story almost immediately. Respected Charleston businessman arrested in assault on daughter. Headlines spread like wildfire, and clients of Caldwell Interiors began withdrawing contracts within hours. A reputation he had spent 30 years cultivating crumbled in a single day. Inside the detention hearing, he glared at me with a mixture of fury and disbelief, as if he still expected me to fix this for him to lie, for him to protect him. But I stood tall beside Ava, breathing through the ache in my ribs, refusing to look away. He had broken bones, but he would never break me again. My mother's downfall came more quietly, but it was no less devastating. On video, she had not touched me, but her complicity was undeniable. Her voice insisting I fell, her attempts to erase the truth, her silence during the attack. She was charged with obstruction and aiding in the cover-up of a violent felony. Her social circle, the charity committees, the elegant brunch groups, the women who praised her hostess skills abandoned her immediately. The very people she had spent her life trying to impress pretended they had never known her. When she was released on bond, she tried to call me. I let the phone ring. For the first time in her life, she felt the sting of being unseen. Victoria, however, faced the most public humiliation. Her wedding collapse became viral, clips of the video leaked, and suddenly the internet knew her not as Charleston's golden girl, but as the sister who recorded an assault for entertainment. Brands cut ties. Her influencer sponsorships evaporated. Darren, once so eager to marry into the Caldwell name, sent a curt message through his lawyer ending the engagement and demanding the return of the ring. Victoria showed up at my apartment building one evening shortly after pounding on the glass doors, demanding I fix the fallout, blaming me for her ruined life. I didn't go downstairs. I didn't answer. The building security escorted her out. For the first time since childhood, the roles had reversed. She was the one screaming into a void, and I was the one who had chosen silence. As for Caldwell Interiors, the business folded within 2 weeks. Lawsuits piled up. Clients cited moral violation clauses. The company was forced to close its doors, leaving my father with mounting legal fees and no income to cover them. Watching the empire that had justified so much cruelty collapse felt not satisfying exactly, but necessary. Justice is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, precise, and historically inevitable. And through all of it, Ava stayed by my side, guiding me, protecting me, reminding me that none of this was my fault. She filed the civil suit, which moved forward swiftly thanks to overwhelming evidence. The judge granted a restraining order that barred both my parents and Victoria from approaching me within 300 feet. My hospital bills, my lost wages, my emotional damages, everything was accounted for. Everything had weight now. Everything had value. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the one paying the price. They were. And in those weeks of fallout, as their world fell apart piece by piece, I realized something simple but profound: consequences weren't cruelty. They were clarity, and clarity was freedom. When the last court date passed and the civil settlement was finalized, I found myself standing on the edge of a life I had never dared to imagine. A life without fear. A life without their voices shaping every thought. A life that finally belonged to me. The morning I received the settlement check, I held it in my trembling hands, not because of the money itself, but because of what it represented. Validation, recognition, proof that what happened to me mattered, proof that I mattered. Ava met me outside the courthouse sunlight, catching the gold flecks in her eyes as she smiled. "This isn't the end," she told me gently, "but it's the beginning you deserve." And she was right. I used part of the settlement to move into a small but beautiful condo overlooking the Charleston harbor. White walls, soft light, big windows that framed the water like a moving painting. For the first few weeks, I woke up expecting to hear my father shouting, or my mother criticizing, or Victoria demanding something. Instead, all I heard was quiet. Pure, undisturbed quiet, and it startled me with how peaceful it felt. Healing wasn't a straight line. Some mornings I cried without knowing why. Some nights I woke gasping from nightmares replaying the assault. But slowly, piece by piece, my life began to rebuild itself around something other than survival. I started therapy with the trauma counselor Ava recommended. I returned to work, and my coworkers surprised me with flowers and gentle smiles instead of questions. I began sketching again, something I hadn't done since college, letting my creativity bleed into page after page until it felt like I could breathe again. I even launched a small freelance design business, and to my astonishment, clients came quickly. Not because of my family name, but because of me. One afternoon, as I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, watching pelicans glide across the water, I received a letter forwarded from my old address. It was from my mother. A long, handwritten apology full of regret excuses and pleas for reconciliation. I read it slowly, letting each word wash over me, and then I folded it neatly and placed it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Some bridges are not meant to be rebuilt. A month later, Victoria tried as well this time, through a desperate voice message sobbing about losing everything, begging me to help her regain her reputation. She said she missed her sister. She said family should forgive. But forgiveness is not a command, not a debt owed, not a free pass for decades of cruelty. I saved the message, then deleted her number. I chose peace instead. On the first warm day of spring, I walked barefoot along the shoreline, the waves brushing over my feet as sunlight warmed my skin. For the first time, the world felt wide open. Beautiful. Mine. I thought of the girl I had been, the one who believed she deserved nothing, who bent until she broke, who stayed silent because she thought that was love. I whispered to her softly, "You're free now." And as the tide pulled back, carrying the last trace of my old life out to sea, I felt something inside me settle. Not anger, not fear, not grief. Strength. Pure, unshakable strength. My father broke my ribs, but he didn't break my future. I built that myself.